So, Rob, thank you very much for joining me on today's podcast. One exciting sector, the space sector, is worth about £17 billion a year today and is expected to grow, I believe, almost 1,000-fold in the next 10 years. And that's a huge, huge opportunity. And the pace of change, not just in innovation, but acceleration in disruption, we're beginning to see that as we sort of look across the landscape, and that's driven by geopolitics as much as technological innovation, as much as a private investment, which is what Seraphim does, as much as the evolving focus of governments and civil society. And it's more than just rocket launches, as I'm sure you'll explain to us today. Something like 20% of our GDP relies on satellite services. So Seraphim Space has an incredible portfolio of businesses that, operate across the sector. How does space, or what you see in space tech, help drive sustainable growth?
Bina, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you today and really bring to life why we're so excited about space and the trends we're seeing in the market and how it can address some of humanity's biggest challenges we're seeing. And just to take a quick step back, why are we doing space? Well, as investors, we were looking for those multi-generational, multi-trillion-dollar opportunities as fund managers back in 2014, 2015. And we recognized that if you want to address some of these huge challenges, from global security to climate change, ubiquitous connectivity, the only place to really do that from was space. We thought space really is analogous to doing a software fund in the 80s or an internet-focused fund in the 90s. And what we've seen since we set out on our journey back in 2016, when we launched the world's first space-focused venture capital fund, is just exponential growth in this industry. When we started out, about $1 billion a year was being invested, but in 2021, $10 billion was invested. And we've seen just relentless growth in that industry. It's been incredibly resilient, despite the general downward trend in venture capital investment since the peak of the market in 2021. Space has probably been the most resilient area. We've seen 8 quarters of growth to date. And what's really driving that is just, I think, the tailwinds around defense today are really catalyzing the opportunity, but also it's the problems we're seeing with climate change, sustainability, and space is well positioned to address those kind of challenges. And I think today we're really at an inflection point in the space industry. If you go back all the way to the first satellite in 1957, Sputnik, we've now seen about 20,000 satellites have been put into space. There's about 11,000 active satellites today. And really the majority of those were put up in the last 4 years alone, from protagonists like SpaceX and their Starlink constellation, which now accounts for about 6,500 of those satellites. And we've seen such a dramatic change in the economics of space and the capability to access space. Going back to when I first started to get interested in space and the shuttle period in the 80s, it cost about $80,000 per kilo to get mass into space. Today, commercially, that's at about $2,000 per kilo. And we're going to see when Starship comes online, that's going to be dropping down to the hundreds of dollars per kilo. So the cost to access space has massively changed the economics. And then also the cost to manufacture satellites has massively changed as well. So overall, the economics are about a 100-factor different to where they were 10 years ago. So that's why it's really exciting for us as investors in this marketplace. And I think people are now really waking up to the fact that space is not a vertical. Space is a horizontal opportunity. There is no vertical market that space won't impact or isn't already impacting. And that's why we're so excited about it. So from our perspective, it's not just sustainable growth, it's very accelerated growth. And I think last year we saw governments increase their budget focused on space by 10% year on year. So governments globally are investing about 125 billion per annum into space. We've seen the number of space agencies is now 85 globally. If you go back probably a decade ago, there were less than 40. So we're really seeing governments swing behind this, the financial sector swinging behind this, and we're really seeing those market opportunities crystallize as well. And the big thing for me is that space, although it's very much, I guess, that hidden infrastructure the linchpin that drives our economy, drives our world, it's really not acknowledged that space is already today a $635 billion market. It's 3 times the size of the AI market. And as you touched on, it's growing at an incredible rate as well. So it's on track to reach about 1.8 trillion, as I said, according to the World Economic Forum. And I think some analysts would suggest that that's potentially conservative with the tailwinds we're seeing around dual-use technology and the utilization of space and the current geopolitical situation. So it's a really exciting time, and we're addressing some of the world's biggest challenges.
So you just talked about the number of satellites that are sort of circulating around in our space ecosystem. Space itself isn't regulated, and with such potential as we look forward, when you talk about, manufacturing opportunities as much as the infrastructure, where do you think the challenges or obstacles might come into play over the next 10 years?
Yes, well, there has been quite a few changes in the regulatory landscape, and there is a degree of regulations that have existed since 1957, which were updated in 1967. But really, that to date is managing who is putting what into orbit, as opposed to what happens then within orbit. Now we're looking at regulation that has come to pass to look at creating a more sustainable space environment. So there is an expectation that people are looking at satellite life extension, end-of-life management of a satellite as well. So there are plans there to manage how much mass is being put into space, but also equally how we then manage that mass over time in space. And this is to the benefit of the industry as well, because if we can extend a satellite life from 3, 5 to 7, 8, 12 years, then that ultimately makes those businesses more profitable. But it will, over time, become a more congested space. We're monitoring over 200 companies that will potentially be putting up over 100,000 satellites over the next decade. So we need to manage a sustainable space environment. At Seraphim Space, that's very much front of mind for us. We're probably the financiers between about 30 and 40% of all of the satellites that are put up on every SpaceX mission that you're seeing. So for us to have a sustainable business model, we've also got to be investing into the technology and also the supporting regulatory landscape to create that sustainable space environment. We've invested into companies that are now actively monitoring all of the assets in space, doing that both terrestrially and also in space as well. So companies like Leo Labs, who are doing it terrestrially, Privateer, who will be doing that in space. But we've also invested into the companies that are actively managing that space environment, who are actively deorbiting satellites like Astroscale, which was IPO'd on the Japanese stock exchange last year. So we're seeing the technology solutions coming through, which are going to help frame the regulatory environment for the benefit of all of us over time.
Yeah, so it feels like it's all beginning to come together. So you talked about investment, VC investment doubling year on year, and how much has been raised in the sector. You talked about how it's a horizontal application of space tech. It's not a vertical. You've just touched on the importance of space in terms of sustainability and your role as an investor in sustaining space. Could you just talk a little bit about what does sustainable space mean to you?
I think we can't forget that with all of the infrastructure we're building in space, the impact that this has from a terrestrial perspective. This is helping us better manage our supply chain. It's helping us do more with less. It's helping us better manage the facilities we have on Earth today. So optimizing crops from a yield perspective, helping us better understand in near real time the effects of climate change. And we're seeing that across the portfolio as well. We have companies that are now providing centimetre level navigation, so optimizing logistics. We have companies that are looking at real-time mapping of deforestation of the Amazon. Companies that are looking at crop yield monitoring for crops, water retention of crops as well, and managing supply chain for the farming community, looking at illegal fishing as well. So many of the companies we're investing into are what we would call dual-use technologies, where the significant commercial markets can be across agriculture, logistics, and so on, but the primary markets are often with governments looking at defence opportunities. One company in particular I would mention is ICEYE, which I think is an exceptional example of that. ICEYE is providing intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance of military movement at any time, day or night, in different contested environments, but is also the same company that it's enabling us to understand real-time risk assessment and catastrophic crop loss when you've got weather events. So that's why we're seeing the insurance industry rapidly adopting space at the moment. So what does a sustainable space environment look like from my perspective? Well, I think we're getting the technology there to now support that long-term infrastructure in space so we can really get the benefits terrestrially. But we have to be good custodians of that environment. And I think we are going to see the regulatory landscape shaping up. I think there is certainly a view that financial services and insurance is well placed to not necessarily act as the regulator, but to adhere to a set of conditions when it's making its investments.
That's really interesting because you talk about sort of being good custodians, and you've given really great examples of how some space tech companies are really helping the sustainability efforts that organisations are all grappling with. You know, everybody's looking at climate change, looking at biodiversity challenges, etc. How mature is that sort of alignment or convergence of those two sort of communities of organisations, and where do you think we are on the maturity curve of being able to really leverage the potential there?
So I think we're certainly seeing adoption in the marketplace. I think space still needs to think about that last mile, the integration from creating these new, unique, novel data sets, and how that translates into real insight for some of the world's biggest companies. So, you know, from my perspective, I very much have to be a market maker. I have to go out there and explain the benefits that space and space data can provide to all these different vertical marketplaces. That adoption is starting to happen. I think probably the early adopters are within the insurance industry, where they can see how this can take them into new markets with new products more profitably than perhaps in the past. I think within financial services, the utilization of space to better understand risk with assets, and then clearly within some of the world's biggest manufacturers, better understanding their supply chain as well. Clearly, defence has been awake to the opportunity around space for a long time, but from our perspective, we really see the big opportunities with the commercial industry. And although perhaps in many cases, certainly in our portfolio, 80% of the companies are dual-use technologies, and that's a great reason for us to invest. It's a great initial customer, but we probably see there being an inflection point over time where the 80-20 bias inverts and moves towards the commercial side and the commercial opportunity.
You've had your most recent New York Stock Exchange listing for Voyager Technologies that on its first day was trading 82% higher than it actually floated at. So, you know, we've got some really great stories of successes. Could you maybe share a little bit about that accelerator program for those that don't know much about it?
So the accelerator program was really met to or launched to meet an unmet need in the marketplace, to address some of the challenges that the deep tech companies and space tech companies have. Our first fund was very much focused on Series A stage transactions. So we were writing the first check to provide space heritage, essentially. So, you know, watching those launches was always very risky from our perspective, going back to sort of 2016 and 2017. But the accelerator was there to support those companies at an earlier stage in their journey, pioneering entrepreneurs with bleeding edge technology. And for us, we felt compelled to help educate the broader market at a very early time in space tech investment about the opportunity that space could provide. And typically what we were finding that probably 75% of the entrepreneurs we were engaging with were PhD astrophysicists, physicists, quantum scientists. And what you tend to find is that if you give them 5 minutes to pitch, they'll take 4 minutes, 50 seconds to tell you about the science and 10 seconds to tell you about the business opportunity. But we knew there was real opportunity there from our perspective. So what we looked to do was to identify these best-of-breed early-stage pioneers and put in place a program to help them better tell their story from a business and investment perspective. And we've seen some really compelling companies come through that program. So we've supported 113 companies through the program. They've now gone on to raise in excess of 700 million from over 300 investors globally, and a number of them we've then supported all the way through to Series B and Series C rounds as well. I think one of my favourite ones is a company called Zona Space Systems, and what they're looking to do is essentially provide centimetre level position, navigation and timing services for the world. So simplistically, centimetre level GPS. So at the moment, GPS will tell you what highway you're on, but not where you are on the highway itself. This will enable an autonomous future from that perspective. But the really important thing is that their technology potentially can mitigate jamming and spoofing as well, which is incredibly important from a defence perspective. You touched on this point earlier. The UK economy, 17% of GDP is completely reliant on GPS services. Without GPS, we don't have any timing, which means if we don't have timing, we don't have financial services, we can't manage our energy infrastructure. So it's incredibly important. And this company, this was just a fortuitous meeting I had at a London Business School MBA event, and I was introduced as the person who had a crazy idea around a space fund and met a crazy space entrepreneur. And I asked him, what is your big play here? And he said, well, I'm going to reinvent GPS for the modern needs of society. I'm doing something that hasn't been done before in 50 years. I'm going to launch the world's first private commercial GPS constellation. And I was slightly skeptical about him and his age until he told me, well, I was the guy who was given the napkin by Elon Musk with his design for the propulsion systems for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy. And I had to implement the engineering team to build that propulsion system. I went to Stanford, and me and my best mates, we all spun out of the original GPS laboratory, and we think this is potentially a good idea. What do you think? And I said, I think this is an excellent idea. Let's work on it together. Come through the accelerator program, and then we did the first $1 million check back in 2019 with one of the PayPal founders, and then they are now going through the process of closing out an additional 100 million in funding, and they'll be the first company in the world to launch a private sector commercial GPS satellite. So that's an incredibly exciting opportunity. It's potentially a $10 billion opportunity, and it's something that we've incubated from inception, and I think there's a clear path to that company IPOing on probably one of the US markets in the coming years.
How exciting to watch a business from sort of an idea, a vision through. And as a founder, you're the same, right? You started your business, or Seraphim, back in 2014 and 16, right?
So we launched the first fund in October of 2016. So it's nearly 10 years that we've been actively investing into space. And, as I said earlier, for us, we're not space people by background. We're venture capitalists by background. I've now been doing deep tech investment for 20 years. And we were just looking to do, back in 2014, 2015, something a little bit differentiated, not just another Me Too deep tech fund, but something that would focus on some of these huge challenges and opportunities. And we just saw that opportunity with space.
So for those budding entrepreneurs out there who are scientists, who would love to set up their own organisation, what attributes are you looking for in those potential? I mean, you talked about, the science versus the opportunity lens, business investment differentiation. What attributes, so for those who are looking, what attributes, because we've seen 10,000 companies, so any advice?
So the fundamentals from a venture capital perspective don't change. It's just the industry and the market opportunity that has changed, and the approach to essentially capturing that opportunity. Ultimately, we're still looking for massive addressable market opportunities, fantastic teams, and innovative, disruptive technology. So if you're an entrepreneur out there, really it's about storytelling. It's really putting forward that compelling opportunity, how you're going to have an impact on society, how you're going to change people's lives, how you can connect the unconnected, how you can address those challenges around climate change or our current geopolitical situation. So start with that big opportunity, how you're going to differentiate yourselves, how you're going to win out, and how you're really going to address that in a novel and unique way. Ultimately, as a fund manager, we need to see companies go on to be billion-dollar companies so we can consistently provide returns back to those people who've bought into what we're doing and how space can change the world.
Seraphim's known for many firsts, but how do you envisage the how do you envisage the role of private companies in really shaping space exploration and commercialization?
I think private companies are really going to be those who do change the future of space and exploration. If we go back to SpaceX, ultimately they changed the model for the engagement of government with the private sector. So NASA moved to a policy of not looking to acquire technology anymore, looking to buy services. And that's really what shaped the venture capital industry. So we talked earlier about how the economics have changed, but now it's the need to get capability as quickly as possible to address some of these challenges. And I think we're only going to see that accelerate even more rapidly with the defense deficit we've got today. And I think a lot of government organizations are changing behavior as well. If you look at the Space Force in the US, they have a $25 billion budget. Last year, 50% of their contracts went to fixed price bids, not cost plus anymore. This is completely changing the dynamics for government engagement. So they're talking now to the primes, but also they're talking to startups. And the conversation is moving away from, can you give me 100% of what I'm looking for at some point in the future, to actually, I'll take 90% if you can guarantee the price and you can deliver it today. So we're seeing the whole industry changing in terms of how startups are engaging with the primes. The primes are potentially, they don't have the capability, but they can provide the scale, the manufacturing scale, and the balance sheet. So they're looking to engage more rapidly with startups. Startups no longer just see themselves as part of a supply chain, they see themselves as a billion-dollar IPO opportunity as well. So I think it's really exciting what the private community is doing, and I think we're going to see far more of that, particularly in Europe. I think the geopolitical landscape has really changed how Europe is now looking at space and the private sector. We've seen such significant potential increases in budget. So looking at the new $800 billion worth of budget coming into Europe focused on defense. But we're also seeing that in the US as well. The recent administration has announced $175 billion worth of funding for their Golden Dome project as well. And that is something where they are looking for capability today, which is driving the engagement, again, with startups and the private community. So this is a really exciting time for startups, the investment community, and generally the private sector.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing that. We're seeing parallels with that around AI as well, and we're seeing that in the commercial sector. You know, how do organisations leverage some of the space technology that you've just talked about? As you look forward in the next year or two, what do you think would be the next thing that could be quite an exciting?
I think some of the most exciting opportunities for us, and we're now seeing a healthy part of our pipeline in this sector, is life sciences and biotech. On the Transporter 14 mission, we're expecting to see one of our biotech investments going up there, who are focused on reformulating cancer therapeutics so they can be delivered in a home environment as opposed to in a hospital environment. So we're starting to see those opportunities coming on stream. So I think life sciences is going to be one of the single biggest industries. And I think this is a huge opportunity for the UK as well, aligning its huge life sciences industry with space as well. As we look further afield, then I think we're starting to see in the area we would call Space 4.0, with Space 3.0 being that infrastructure in space, is space is an infinite source of power and a place for us to put some of our potentially heavier industries in as well. So looking at generating power from space-based solar power, but also looking at the opportunity that the cislunar, the moon economy can play in terms of providing rare materials, rare minerals. And then I think we also have, can we put some of our industries like data centers in space? If we can look at the economics, the unit cost for putting data centers in space, it makes sense to put them up there because of the environment from a cooling perspective and also an infinite source of energy as well. So I think this is a really exciting period for us. So it's not just about what space is doing today, it's what it's going to do over the next 100 generations for us as a society.
It's going to come quite quickly, though, isn't it? Because the need and demand is there. If you think about your space 4.0, that isn't generations away, is it really?
It's not at all. With the Artemis program, we're potentially putting people back on the moon for the first time in 50 years. It's amazing that we haven't done it in that long. And when we do it, that's for good as well. So it's moon as a permanent space habitat. And we're already seeing the technology starting to come on stream, which will help us take that next step beyond moon. And clearly, the world's wealthiest person is fixated on taking people back to, or not back to, people to Mars.
To Mars, yeah. Your most recent space index highlights different investment performances globally. You talked a little bit about Seraphim's investment performance and how you set up and how you look at return. How do you see the UK comparing against other countries when you look at that sort of global index?
So if we look at the overall picture, last year 8.6 billion was invested into space startups globally by the private investment community. That was a 25% uplift on the prior year in terms of the amount of capital. Yeah. So that's why it is one of the fastest growing industries. And it was 45% up in terms of the number of deals. So what we're seeing is a huge volume now of deals coming through at the earlier stages, the pre-seed and the seed stages. If we break that down, then the single biggest recipient of VC funding into space has typically been the US. So they account for more than generally the rest of the world put together. That changed last year because we really saw Asia come into the market and mainly China. And they reached parity early last year. China has now recently dropped away a little bit. So going back down from sort of 30 or 40% of the market down to about 10%. If we look at Europe, then Europe last year was about 1.5 billion of that went into European companies. I think we're seeing Europe is rapidly picking up pace. So early last year, Europe reached parity in terms of the number of deals being done with the US market. Then the US picked up pace again. But we're seeing a lot of early stage deals coming through. Where does the UK sit? Well, I think generally we've punched above our weight. So you've got the US, China, and then typically the UK has been third in the world in terms of the amount of capital and the number of deals being done. However, we're dropping down the table at the moment. So last year we dropped down fourth behind Germany, and there's a fast chasing pack of France, Italy, Japan, and India as well, all of whom are receiving between about 250 million and 350 million in private capital per annum. We've seen a lot of stimulus come into the European market. So the European Investment Fund, stroke European Investment Bank, is probably the biggest investor into space startups in Europe through their Fund of Funds program. So we're seeing a lot of big deals being done in Europe, and that's why we're dropping down the table a little bit. And I think actually our average deal size is now down at 17th in the world in terms of the average for each deal, and then 10th in Europe. So there is work to be done, and I think what we need to do in the UK is really solve for that scale-up capital side. So looking at the A rounds, the B rounds, typically space tech startups need twice as much capital at a stage earlier than the general VC market. So the valley of death is bigger in space tech. It needs later stage capital allocators to come downstream into that market to support those companies. So if we can solve for that, then I think we can push the UK back up the table again, back up to third again, and change the opportunity for the UK.
So you've just talked about sort of venture capital money and helping businesses in the UK and how can we unlock some of that. As businesses grow, there's also the exits, right? So the exit might be an IPO, might be something else. What more could the UK be doing?
So we need a very healthy capital market, and we benefit from that ourselves. We took that decision to create the world's first listed growth-focused investment fund looking at space. We're listed on the main market of the London Stock Exchange, and we hope that will encourage more people to also look at the London Stock Exchange as well. The exciting thing for me, though, is so many people are seeing and understanding the story of SpaceX, but it's very difficult to invest into SpaceX. And our fund provides that opportunity for the general public to access the excitement of new space.
And I think it's fair to say that what you've just talked about, dual use, the commercial importance, the importance of space in the future, is recognised in the industrial strategy that the UK has launched, where space is recognised as a key enabler to deliver the growth that the UK is trying to deliver over the next 10 years, which kind of plays to that, I think, as well.
Absolutely. We're delighted to see that space has been called out in the industrial strategy as one of 8 key industries for the UK to deliver against. And I think it's an exciting time. There's a lot about the financing of space as well. So from our perspective, we're delighted to be working with UK government on that to deliver that strategy.
What role does government have to play in the success of space and how space evolves?
Ultimately, you've got a rapidly growing multi-trillion-dollar market that can help from a sovereign capability perspective, but also can grow the economy. The role government can play there, well, they can be catalytic. They can be the first customer of many. So in terms of government departments and defence agencies acquiring space data, space technology, that can have a significant effect in terms of driving capital into those opportunities as well. We're seeing that in the US, where Department of Defence is providing significant capital into category leaders, and that's driving the private capital into those opportunities as well. So I think government as a procurer, government as an investor into funds that are addressing this huge opportunity as well. These are the kind of things we would like to see. I think finally, government is recognising the opportunity to be a global leader in space finance as well. You know, this is a multi-trillion-dollar economy, and a nation can step forward and be the financier of choice, putting in place the right landscape, the right products and services to support space companies all the way from inception through to exit as well.
Seraphim recently described as the world grapples with economic instability, geopolitical conflict, and the rise of AI-driven misinformation, the demand for trustworthy real-time intelligence is more critical than ever. Satellite technology is positioned to play a transformative role in rebuilding trust. I just wondered if you could maybe share a little bit more about what was behind that statement and how SpaceTech is vital or important to UK and European defence.
So SpaceTech is critical from a defence perspective. Space is ultimately the high ground. So space enables us to better understand and manage what's happening on the ground. So from an intelligence, a surveillance, a reconnaissance perspective, from a navigation and a communications perspective, space ultimately is that hidden linchpin which supports all of those activities. But it's not just what space can do for us from a terrestrial perspective. We also have to manage that critical infrastructure in space as well. So space is one of the most critical industries from a defence perspective moving forward. That is why we're seeing it called out from a NATO perspective. It's one of their 7 critical pillars for key technologies they see, but they understand and recognise that it underpins really all of the areas of advanced technologies that they're focusing on. So if we look at the transactions that have happened in SpaceTech in Europe, 40% of them in the last year were dual-use technologies. So we're really waking up to how SpaceTech can reduce the current defence deficit we've got.
I just wanted to understand a little bit about your personal motivations that kind of really led you down this path. What's really motivating you to pursue this career down into space as well?
So from my perspective, I think there are boundless opportunities with space, and for me, it's just fascinating to work with some of the most pioneering individuals I've ever come across who are so keen to address some of these incredible challenges. And it is a hard path for many of them, but they are absolutely grabbing it. We're seeing a whole breed of entrepreneurs coming straight out of universities now who want to take their bleeding edge technology and genuinely change the world for the better. And working with these minds is exceptional from my perspective as they address these real world problems that we need to do. And as someone who's got a 4-year-old daughter who's growing up in a more challenging environment than we've seen for decades in terms of the global security situation and climate change, then for me, it's really important to be, helping support the companies that can potentially remove some of her challenges over the coming decades. So for me, that's the real motivation, making a change for her future.
And as you think about that and you sort of come across these great minds, it's really hard starting a business. It's even harder to scale it, and it's really hard to get it to that next level. What bit of advice would you give a sort of a young person at university who wants to really change the world, as you described it?
Well, I think this goes back to one of the earlier things I said. Focus on the storytelling. Yeah. Really tell that big vision and be relentless and resilient in your approach to deliver on that vision. There are people out there who will support that journey. And I think, ultimately, it is about also, addressing these huge challenges, but also making sure that you can evidence that there's a path to returns for the people who are going to support your journey as well.
There are boundless opportunities to talk about, right? Space is such a big topic. And what I think you've helped to do today, Rob, is not just demonstrate how important Seraphim is in terms of investment and investor, but what's really come through loud and clear is space is a critical domain for a commercial as much as it is for defence, national security, and it's recognising that, the importance of that, and how we work together, private, government sectors, to make sure that that works well. Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bina. And I think what's been really interesting for me is that to sit down today with KPMG and have this conversation, this would never have happened 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. So I think it really brings to life where space is today. And the fun thing for me is we didn't talk about astronauts, rockets, billionaires, or Katy Perry, which is a real relief.
Thank you very much.